We're a bit late, so it would be useful for us to begin as soon as possible on this, with this first debate, smart fruit debate session.
Comencem, doncs, aquesta primera sessió, com ja s'ha dit per part de a la pomera, i en primer lloc comentar el nou format que ha organitzat.
Okay, we'll look at the new format in this year's session. The presentations are split into three different axis. A first block, which refers to research of two pests chosen for this session, Cydia pulmonella and Venturia, or scab. The second one, or second axis, which will deal with the technical aspect of IPM, referring to these two pests, and a third block. They're all linked together, of course, which has to do with the sort of business producer side. We'll talk about their difficulties when it comes to actually implementing IPM. We're a bit behind time, so let's get stuck in, and we'll move to the first scientific presentation, which will be given by Jesús Avila. Jesús Avila is Professor of Plant Production at the University of Lleida. He has taught in entomology until 1982, and in IPM. His research activity has been based in Lleida and in the IRTA. He has been the main researcher since '98. He has many publications, more than 80 scientific papers, and others of a more general nature. And he is Deputy Vice Chancellor of the university. So, Jesus, up to you. Go ahead.
Bon dia a tothom. Bon dia, senyor moderador, companys.
Hi, everyone, colleagues, friends. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be in this latest Smart Fruit Congress as a meeting point for sciences, technology, and companies. The aim of my presentation, what I would like it to be anyway, I say would, and let's see if I actually achieve this, but I want to open some points for discussion on one of the main pests in apples and pears, which is codling moth, or the Carpocapsa. I like this slide. And you can see how we have to look at codling moth in a very different way from the way we used to. Carpocapsa right now is a widely spread pest, and we have to look at it from taking a multi-year approach. We can't look at it on a year-by-year basis, and we have to do this on a large scale using all kinds of selective measures that we have at our disposal. In fact, I will go so far as to say that selective control should give priority to sexual confusion using pheromones in controlling Carpocapsa, together with other different decision-making tools we may have. So A lot of the problems we've had has been the result of broad spectrum insecticide use and the development of resistance provoked by these insecticides. The codling moth has a lot of literature devoted to it. There's a lot we could talk about. I've chosen just these areas that I have up here on this slide. I know I've left some things out, but almost in any control method, there will have been a technique which has been applied to combat codling moth. Crop control, microbiology, insecticide, crop management, pheromones, or whatever. These have all been applied to control codling moth. And if I have left anything out, and any of you think that would be useful, of course we can address it in the debate. The use of communication amongst insects to control them with attraction and kill procedures and so forth. Well, all of this has raised questions on new defense diffusers or dispensers, which are better. Also, the attraction and kill is being broadly used. And chemical control and sexual confusion can be used together. In the case of granulosis virus as a control method, fortunately, this is not so recent. It's been becoming more widespread. We're seeing some resistance in some European population, also protectors of the virus that are appearing. Will also refer to resistance. Now, I selected a graph, a figure, or a table from some recent publication on it. And of course, it's not the only piece of literature, and I can't say that it's the most important, but the idea is to center the debate. What about adult population density estimates? This is something we've been doing for a long time using pheromone traps. The problem arose when we started using sexual confusion widely, and then we stopped using that tool that we had trusted in for so long, which was the pheromone trap. To start with, the diffuser load increased, and at some point, the first volatile or adult attractant appeared on the market, which was pear ester. And pear ester began to be used to sample the evolution of adult populations in plots with sexual confusion being used. There's a lot of literature on the subject. And in this graph on the y-axis, you can see a measurement of adults captured. Depending on the diffuser used in the pheromone trap, on white you see the combo, which is a mixture of pear, ester, and pheromone, and this is codlamone, and the other one is pear, ester alone. In tests done in Argentina, in over 100 plots, pear ester showed a greater number of captures than pheromone-baited traps. It wasn't much different in the case of apples than it was in pears. So we had a tool that was somewhat better than the pheromone trap to estimate the evolution of the adult population. Now, from here, another problem arose, which was the problem of transfer. What that means is that when we change the tool, we have to change the farmer's perception and how the farmer uses that tool. When you capture individuals on a plot with one trap or another, it doesn't mean there are more or less individuals. It just means we're capturing a smaller or larger amount of these individuals. So we have to be able to readapt our perception of intervention thresholds to the tolerance levels. At first, we were fairly optimistic when we saw that pair Esther also captured females. So we thought, hey, now we've got a tool for us to be able to follow the evolution of adult females. And that's not the case. It does catch females, as you can see on this slide, where you see the combo captures some females as well. But in fact, there are many fewer captured than males. And there are many virgin females as well as females that have already mated. Many plant volatiles were tested, and there's a whole line of investigation on how to use plant volatiles, which can serve as attractants for adults, ideally both for males and females, codling moths. Extracts of volatiles from fruits and leaves have been tested. I selected this slide showing the number of codling moth captures when the bait was a pheromone, PE is pair, ester, PH and P is a combination, et cetera, et cetera. The A is acetic acid. Well, it's different depending on the orchard and the sort of background of aromas in the orchard. A conventional orchard is not the same as one with sexual confusion, or an orchard with sexual confusion done with pheromone plus pair ester. I chose this slide because it points out that the use of acetic acid makes it possible to increase the number of females trapped. When the specific objective is to catch females, there's our prime product, which is acetic acid, which can also be used, as I'm saying, to promote such captures. Professor Albajes was saying before that the success of a good control program or control technique depends on knowing how to use it. In the case of pheromones, I think we've had the opposite problem. That is, they've worked so well that we've been using it without bothering to find out why it worked so well. I think sex pheromones, rather sexual confusion is an example. We keep using it, but we don't really know why it works. And that's the basis for this graph, which shows the response, or rather shows the composition of pheromone in codling moth from different countries. We're used to talking about pheromone of a codling moth as simply codlamone, or one single pheromone, but we've seen up to 6 or more. Usually codlamone is the predominant one, but there are others as well. The pheromone composition measured in populations in Canada and Spain, for example, in the glands of the female are not the same. What that means is that on occasion, the success of sexual confusion as a system will depend on the population we're treating. Now, in the case of codling moth, it's not as important because basically we're using codlamone, which is the major or the main component. But then, now I'm going to say that this can be an element of risk in developing a resistance to sexual confusion if we use a particular pheromone mix, and at the same time, that means that we're selecting those races that have a different pheromone makeup. In some cases, the diffuser load has been increased greatly to try to be successful, but in fact it hasn't always worked because the number of captures per trap and day has not been increased on a par with the amount of loaded into the diffuser. Sometimes on some occasions it's even lower. The first diffusers or dispensers led to the development of other systems I won't talk about pheromone sprays, although at present there are tests being done using micro sprinklers to spray them onto each tree. There are new trends, such as the decrease in, I don't know if it's, I've got an echo here, the quantity of pheromone in each diffuser or dispenser, and also the use of aerosol sprays. Aerosol sprays are also the example, I think, as well, of something that works well, but we don't really worry about or how it actually works. And the use of aerosols on the field are shown up here. And what we see is that the area of influence of an aerosol, this is the response we need to know how many aerosols to use per hectare. And 0.00, which I can't really point out, but it's, well, it's here, 00. That's where the dispenser, the diffuser, is located. At some distance, this provokes it leads to a decrease of captures, a delay in the first capture, which is what you see, the figure in the middle. If you compare a plot where there's one diffuser, which is the upper line, to one where there's no diffuser, which is the line below, and distances of up to 300 meters in the direction of the wind, which is along the x-axis. Up until recently, the optimal density of aerosols had not been examined. This shows the percentage of decrease of captures in terms of the number of dispensers from 0 to 15. Even with 15 dispensers, we don't get complete elimination of these captures. So aerosols act via a competitive mechanism. They compete with the females. They don't actually hide what the females emit. Attraction of females has been studied in codling moth for a long time. It hasn't been so commercially successful, perhaps, but there are studies that show that eliminating individuals, not using an insecticide, but just using a sticky trap, actually improves the confusion technique. What you see in the graph is the number of captures in a control area on the left, and with classical isometric control on the middle, and non-sticky tracks, the third from the left, and the sticky trap on the fourth from the left. Using a lot of sticky traps, and we're talking here about mass trapping via sexual confusion, is also promising. So I'm talking about different control methods. It's important to note possible effects of sublethal doses of insecticides on sexual confusion. And we're talking about sublethal doses, but what do they affect? The quantity of the sexual pheromone measured by the female, and the sexual behavior of the female, and the behavior of the male, and their difficulty in detecting the pheromone. And also the input of volatiles here. This is an area which is currently being studied. There's a doctoral thesis being underway in our laboratory. Methoxyphenolide exposure decreases the male and female antenna's ability to respond to the pheromone. Those of us who've been around for a while would think it would be impossible to imagine that insects could become resistant to this, but in fact they do. They are very adaptable, and they adapt to everything. This shows resistance of codling moth populations to granulovirus, which shows the development of strains of granulovirus, which is the need for these strains which are not subject of resistance by codling moth. Action potentiators, in the case of granulovirus, can also help. They can help make this control successful. And here we have the results of some assays where it's shown that by adding certain yeasts and a sugar, the codling moths feed more, and so that it proves lethal. In the case of resistance, which is a very broad subject, we could talk about at length about any of these topics for at least a couple of hours. The question of resistance in Spanish populations, well, we haven't seen that it's really widespread. Of course, there are resistant populations. For example, the one you see here, named as Puigverd, has against amlodipine, has a huge resistance, as you can see up here. But that's kind of an exception amongst the populations that we've analyzed. So we shouldn't forget that this is an important question, and at the same time, appropriate use of IPM, combining all the control elements we have at our disposal, won't be able to avoid the entire problem. We have to remember that. Thank you very much for your attention.
Gràcies, Jesús. Si us sembla bé...
Well, thank you, Jesus. We'll leave the questions until the end for all of these speakers. Can you hear? Can everybody hear the speakers? Or is there some kind of an echo? Have you heard? Yeah, it's okay. Here we don't hear very well, but anyway, that's less important. We now have the second part of our scientific session. Now we will hear about Ventouria. We'll be hearing from somebody who hasn't been here with us very often, unfortunately, because he's Mark Tratman. He's a director and he's responsible for Biofruit company, which creates simulation models for different pests. And now, of course, he'll be talking about the one we're doing in this session, Ventouria. RIM Pro is the name of that model, but there are other programs and models that they've developed for codling moth, for the others like sooty mildew and so forth. He's a promoter of ecological production in his country, and he'll be speaking for 20 minutes about Ventouria and modeling of it. Thank you. Mark?
Thank you. Good morning to you all. I didn't understand the introduction, but I'm going to give you a very practical talk about the challenges we have nowadays in our apples cap control in practice. And as you see here in my title, apples cap control and management becomes a precision work. There are many things that we have to deal with there. Apples cap is a key disease for apple production worldwide, not only here. So there is no commercial apple production possible without good control of apples cap, and that accounts for IPM, but also for organic. Even organic growers have to spray a lot to keep apples cap from their fruits. And that was now, and that was in the past, as you can see in the picture on the left below. If you look on the use of pesticides and fungicides especially, then at least in mid and northern Europe, at least 75% of the input of fungicides is for scab control. And this enormous input has important consequences, both social, economical, and environmental. By social, I mean that apples cap is in the mind of apple growers all the time, and their advisors. So everything has to is guided in spring by apple cap. Every rain has to be watched at. Do I have to spray again or not? So it has an enormous social influence on the life of fruit growers. Economical and environmental is very clear, I guess. We face a lot of challenges. First thing is that we like to grow susceptible varieties. We like a lot to grow susceptible varieties. Every new variety is more susceptible than the older ones. Think Gala, Braeburn, Fuji, Pink Lady. It seems to get more susceptible all the time. So disease control is no reason not to plant a variety. But on the other hand, we have to reduce environmental impact. There's a lot of pressure on us, and that's the reason that we gather here. We have to do with less pesticide and less treatments. Third point is we have to reduce residue levels. Our consumers don't want these fungicides or pesticides on the end product, on the fruits, so we have to control apple scab with less treatments and less residues. But the fungus we are facing is highly adaptable. Like the codling moth, it can easily adapt to new varieties, new fungicides. It needs just a few generations to adapt its genes to these new circumstances. And that means that all over Europe, and not only Europe but worldwide, we face resistance or at least reduced efficacy of all families of systemic fungicides. If you use a systemic fungicide, you're not sure anymore if it works. 10 years ago, you could make nice programs and wait for infections, spray after the infection with a curative fungicide, and it would work. Doesn't work anymore, not sure. So we have to go back to the old-fashioned Captan and Delan and work more preventively for our apple scab control. But the new registrations of these classic contact fungicides limit the use in dose rate and limit the use in number of applications per year. So again, a problem. And in practice, for you as growers and advisors, it's very difficult to combine this all in a strategy that will work. So what do we need? Which way can we go? I will address these things in my talk in the next slides. So can we grow less susceptible varieties? Is that an option? I'm advisor for organic fruit growing. When I started to consult for organic fruit growing 15, 20 years ago, I thought, well, we have to go to another type of varieties that is not so susceptible for apple scab. So is that an option or not? There is a lot of knowledge about apple scab, but from all the knowledge that we have, only a very tiny bit is used in practice. So can we find ways to use more of the things that we know about apple scab to do a job better? We have to train the growers and advisors to use this knowledge and the decision support systems. We have to think of better spraying techniques, better calibration of our sprayers, and we have to apply sanitary practices wherever necessary and possible. Oh, sorry, one too far. So what about these less susceptible varieties? In the past 20 years, at least 300 VF-resistant varieties, so scab-resistant apple varieties, have been tested on research stations. Tested in the sense that they were checked for production, growth, color, storability, all kinds of issues that you test on a new variety to see if it's good, if it can meet the requirements. Very few of these 300 varieties have gained practical interest and are grown on a certain level in Europe. I mentioned here Topaz, a Czech variety that is grown a lot in Europe. Santana is more grown in the north of Europe. Gold Rush is a variety grown in France and Italy. All are VF-resistant varieties that have gained some interest in practice, but in volume it's still very low. We find by growing these scab-resistant varieties that we still have to apply fungicides. Because if we don't spray against apple scab anymore, the apples get black from sooty blotch, or we get Gliosporium, or we get mildew. And you see Marsonina standing there, a new leaf fall disease that came from Southeast Asia, which is very aggressive. It arrived in Italy, is now also in Switzerland, southern Germany, Austria, and compared to Marsonina, apple scab control is easy. So it's really an important disease. And last of all, VF resistance is broken. So first VF-resistant varieties were introduced in the 40s of the last century. Now we find apple scab on VF-resistant varieties all over Europe. This, for instance, is a VF-resistant variety, Santana, with a lot of apple scab. And the situation in at least mid and northern Europe is so that it doesn't make sense anymore to plant VF-resistant varieties because scab strains that have overcome these VF resistance are everywhere. So you can plant new varieties because they're good, but planting VF-resistant varieties because they are VF doesn't work. So how about these less susceptible varieties? Well, the tendency in organic fruit growers in Europe is that they leave the VF-resistant varieties and plant again the normal commercial varieties. So that would mean in the Netherlands that our organic growers plant Elstar again, our main variety. In Belgium they plant Jonagold again, that's their main variety. In Italy, Austria, they plant Gala, Braeburn, Fuji, the things that you would plant as an IPM grower. So today, in this variety research and the new varieties, I see no scab-resistant or robust variety that can replace our main varieties. So I think that's not the way we can go. Then what about the information and decision support systems? There is an awful lot of information about apple scab that is useful. This on the left is the paper from Mills. Everyone is talking about Mills tables, Mills curves, and so, well, on the left is the paper from Mills. It's only 3 pages. It's not meant to be a scientific paper. It was just a bulletin that he wrote for his growers at the end of the Second World War. 3 pages, 1 graph, with a few examples. And that changed the world in a sense. Now they're talking about scientific impact points, and you have to be very good to have impact points. Well, this thing is not a scientific publication and had the most impact in scab control of all papers. Then 50 years later, on the right side, you see the book that Bill McHardy wrote. It's 500 pages on apple scab. 500 pages, about this thick, and it's far from complete. Well, of course, no one can read that whole book, understand it, and put it into practice, in his daily practice, making decisions to spray or not to spray. So what can we do? Well, we can put all this information in models. There are weather stations all around in Europe, and you can use this data from weather stations as input and run high sophisticated models that contain all the knowledge that we have and can be fed with new knowledge that comes from research. And then we come to these nice graphs that you generate based on weather data that run on the internet, are updated every half hour to keep up with what is really happening in the practice. When I explain this, my pointer is not working. Now it should be working. Okay, so here on the lower bar you have weather data. Light blue is leaf wetness, dark blue is when it's raining. So we have here a potential spores in the leaf litter under the trees. It's raining here, spores come out in a few hours, depending on temperature and all kinds of weather data input. These spores are now on the leaves. This is the white cloud here, they're on the leaves. They try to germinate and make their germ tube, are very, very susceptible for fungicides in this stage. And here where the red line takes off, we have the very first spores that have been discharged there, now made it to go into the leaf. And as time goes on, more and more spores make it to enter the leaf and penetrate the leaf and make the infection. So this kind of information learns us spores are discharged when the infection comes, and we can plan our fungicide treatments according to that. If you run that over a whole year, you can see potential ascospores going down because the leaf litter degrades and the spores get mature and are shoot out. You can see infection moments, 2 very important infections. So at that point in time, everything should be 100% perfect, otherwise you have scab problems. And you see some lesser infection moments in between, and here primary apple scab season is over. So these kind of models can help us to concentrate on the main infections and use fungicides only in these periods. Well, we're talking about apple scab warning systems all the time, but we did not warn until shortly. We told our growers that there was an infection yesterday. Well, that's not quite a warning. So warnings you make when you feed your models also with weather forecasts. So what we do with the models is you feed the model with weather data coming from a weather station until now. So this is the moment now. And then you calculate further with localized weather forecast to see what is going to happen the next days or the next hours. So here you see there's nothing happening here, but in a few days we expect rain, and this rain will probably bring a very important infection. So as grower or advisor, you can decide to spray just before that moment. And when it comes closer, like here, you can see, okay, it will go there, and I have a few hours to treat on these infections. And in another situation, it can be that, yes, there is discharge of ascospores, but these spores will not germinate, will not give an infection, as the forecast is that the leaves will be dry and the infection will stop from itself. So this makes it possible to bring all the knowledge we have on apple scab in models and give it a nice interface that can be used for interpretation of situations by growers. I was talking about weather stations, but I think in a few years we will not work with weather stations in orchards anymore. There are initiatives to work with weather that come from satellites and radar and have very highly resolution weather data. So this is a slide that I took from a colleague in Canada. There they have a high resolution weather prediction system that provides data every 30 minutes. Based on satellites and radar. They have a 2.5 kilometer grid. So that means the grid is finer than we have with each of our weather stations in orchards. Well, the forecast is now updated every 6 hours. That's kind of rough. But the developments they have these years is that they go to 15 minutes intervals, and they have a 200-meter mesh grid. So that would mean in future that we can make simulations of situations for every orchard or vineyard that we are interested in. So that is something that is running, that looks now a little bit like Star Trek or so, but I'm very sure that when we meet in 5 years, we will do this. Okay, then when we trust these models, and the models are running, we can also use the models to tell something about the fungicides that we applied. To give a simple example, here we have a spray made with Dilan, on contact fungicides, that is covering the leaves. This leaf cover degrades here, you see in gray, and here it drops a bit, and here it degrades further. What is happening there? The model calculates leaf growth, leaf extension growth, so you have sprayed, you have 1 milligram per square centimeter of a fungicide, and then the leaf grows, and it doubles its size, then you have only 0.5 milligram per square centimeter. So what you see here is dilution because of expansion growth of leaves. Then here it drops because it was raining. So part of your fungicide is flushed off. And at the moment that the infection is developing here, we have only this estimated level of fungicide. And now you can think, is this enough or not enough? We have another infection, and now the level is much lower of your fungicide. So probably that's not enough, and surely not enough for this huge infection that is coming there. We don't have the time to go in very much detail there, but this is how things work. Of course, models can process the things that we understand and provide us information quickly, but then we have to interpret. And in this interpretation, there's a lot more than just what a model brings. In the orchard situation, to decide if you have to treat or not to treat, more things come into play. So here, 3 types of apple varieties. Are we talking about a low susceptible variety, a medium, or a high susceptible variety? That's one thing that comes into play. The other thing is, how is the scab pressure, disease pressure from last year? Did I have no scab last year, or a little bit, or a lot of scab last year? So that makes up your situation that can be different from orchard to orchard, and you take that into your decisions what to do. So if you're talking about low susceptible varieties, and you had little scab last year, then the risk that something goes wrong this year is low. If we go to the other side, if we have a high susceptible variety, and we had a lot of scab last year, then the risk that something goes wrong this year is high to extreme. And that's what you find in every situation. You have your orchards, and you have one block that has apple scab. You do the same next year, and you find again apple scab in the same block. That's not because your program was not good, but the pressure was higher in that block that had a lot of scab last year. In these extreme situations, with an extreme pressure of apple scab and a susceptible variety, you cannot only rely on your fungicide treatments to do the job. The pressure is simply too high. With the fungicide sprays, you can have perhaps 95% effectiveness or 90% effectiveness. That means that about 5% of the spores is not killed by your fungicides. If you have a small pressure, low pressure of apple scab, this 5% of the spores that you don't kill with your fungicides make a spot here or there in your orchard and you're very happy. But if you have a high scab pressure, this 5% spores make a lot of scab and you're not happy. And you cannot do more than this 90 or 95% effectiveness with your treatment, so you have to find something else. And that else that you need in these situations is sanitation. This is a nice machine. It doesn't have to be this nice, but this is a machine that is a kind of sweeper that after winter takes out the leaves from your tree, crushes them, and takes them away, like a big vacuum cleaner in your orchard. Well, of course, this is a research machine, but you can do the same with your brushes that you use to take out the pruning woods, crush them with your mower so that they degrade quicker. You can use things like urea to make the leaves degrade quicker. So anything that you can find to improve leaf degradation helps to reduce the pressure of apple scab. Apple scab is coming from the leaves that survive winter. So here we work with a machine and all the leaves are gone. Here the leaves are still lying. So you can see that here all these leaves are producing ascospores with every rain. And here the leaves are gone, so the number of ascospores is much lower. And this is not what I wanted. Okay, then I just tell you. So it's very easy to clean out 70% or 80% of the leaves. The effect is that with every rain in spring, 70% less spores are produced. That means during every rain in spring, the situation is like you already applied a fungicide that had 70% effect. So sanitation always works, always helps to improve situations. Because of time, we go past this. This is the most important slide, and I tell every grower you have to make a poster out of it, hang it over your bed, because this is how we do it, but we don't have time today to go through it all. I want to tell something about spraying techniques. When we decide to treat with something, we have to bring this product on the leaves. And this spraying technique is a very essential part in our scab control. With these traditional sprayers, you can never reach an equal distribution of your fungicides. People that do research on this type of sprays say there's at least a factor 10 to 15 between the best covered leaf and the least covered leaf. So we can discuss to put a little bit more fungicide in the tank, but this factor 15 you will never cover. So we need better spraying techniques. We need to test sprayers. With all kinds of test benches, people find out how the distribution of liquid, how the distribution of air is to cover your trees equally. It's a very important part of your IPM management in orchards. So to conclude, we have to implement decision support systems to know what we do, when we have to treat and when we do not have to treat. We have to train advisors and growers to really use them, because these systems are around, but people don't know what they mean and how to use and how to implement them. We have to test and adapt spraying equipment so that we can use less fungicides and still have a very good results. These sanitation measures have to be applied in high-risk orchards, high-pressure orchards, because without, you will fail. And we have to look for international cooperation to develop strategies. Many people in Europe are looking at the same thing, have ideas, and we should share these ideas to get better. Thank you very much for your attention.
L'aparato da canviar.
This is just pointer.
Poi.
Solucionat el...
Okay, we're now to our microphone. Okay, this first, if like, module, which looked at the scientific part I mentioned, and now let's look at the second block, which is more technological or technical, if you like, but referring to the same pests, strategies to control them, strategies, challenges. Luis Bagliori will be our first speaker in this module, the second module, who works in plant health in the Department of Agriculture in Girona. He's been there since 1983. He has been working there. He has been professor in the Polytechnical University of Girona. He has managed the warning system since 1983, the network of follow-up of diseases and pests. He has worked on integrated IPM, various types of production, and he is part and parcel of FruitNet since 2011. Luis, up to you.
Good morning. Well, I want to thank the organization for inviting me to this roundtable discussion.
Tu no. L'organització...
Here we go. I think that's it. I'm going to be talking mainly about codling moth and scab as a challenge for apple crops. It's a main challenge for integrated pest management. Going on with what was said in the keynote lecture by Mr. Albages, we have a whole long list of apple pests, although not all of them are ones that we have to focus on. When I began working on integrated pest management, the first thing I had to do was determine which are the key pests, those which don't have enough natural enemies to control it, where the orchards, even the ones that aren't treated, have damage by codling moth, fruit fly, and even grapholita. There are some that do have natural enemies, but they're insufficient, which would be like leopard moth, for example, or rosy apple aphid. The key ones are these. The key pests, that is. There are also pests that are controlled by natural enemies. With integrated management, biological control may not be sufficient, however, so we have to intervene. San Jose scale is necessary. The problem is that we have zero tolerance from the commercial standpoint, so we have to act quickly. And also the woolly moth. Finally, we have those where, with integrated management, we can keep things under control. That doesn't mean that some of these can get out of control. Along the lines of what Mr. Bages was saying, Ramon Bages, having natural enemies for control. We're talking about antagonists of these pests have a major role to play. Integrated pest management is nothing more than trying to find control strategies for key pests which can respect their natural enemies to the extent possible. naturally, we have to find a way of managing the two. That's why we look at the plant's vegetative period. We divided into 4 periods which we felt were important. The winter rest period, before bloom, spring, summer, and pre-harvest. So we have to see at each stage which measures we have to apply. From that standpoint, and using integrated management guidelines, we've drawn up a global strategy. I agree with Ramon Albaiges that these guides on IMP are good, but they don't have such a holistic approach on how to manage crops. They talk about strategies, and you see a list for each pest, but it doesn't highlight our work as advisors in this area, which is how to combine them to make a common strategy. Here, in the case of powdery mildew, we do preventive treatment. In the case of apple scab, we would use control, then prediction models, which would tell us whether or not to treat. In the case of San Jose scale, given the 0 tolerance, we have to treat it right away. We have to do it before bloom and during, where we have other alternative methods for other pests. For example, in the case of sexual confusion for codling moth, for zebra moth or pandemis, for the fruit fly, large-scale trapping has been useful. And these alternative methods then would be what we would use in those cases. In the case of bloom, we try to act against mites, depending on the population. And after that, we would try to use as much as possible biological control with plant protection products. Now, if we look at the type of products, I could say that during that period, there's no fruit on the tree. Obviously, we want to have as selective a product as possible with less side effects. But if we do need a very powerful product, it's better to use it here now than later. This is when we decide on the campaign in terms of pests, because we see the first generation of most pests appearing. So we have to be as effective as possible in our actives, but act selectively to no change, to not affect the other fauna. And there are also commercial considerations. There's some that we try not to use, and we have to be aware of the traces of any kind of treatment that can remain on our production. There are warning systems throughout Catalonia as well. But each technician has to adjust it for the particular plot and for the area, and of course depending on the crop involved. I'll talk a little bit about what we're told we should do for codling moth in the integrated management guide. This is the official guide. There's a table for strategies. It tells, there's a part on follow-up and estimating the risk for crops, prevention measures, intervention thresholds, methods to use, and alternatives methods, as well as chemical methods. Each page includes photos to show what we're talking about, and then we hear about the biological cycle of the pests, the biology of the pest, and how to manage it using IPM criteria. I'm going quickly over this because everybody is familiar with it. One thing I did want to point out, though, in these guides, we work together on this. All the people on plant pathologies, those of us working with fruit, and there are 3 major times we have to act, or times, a critical period, let's say, depending on the generation. And we can determine this using sexual attractant traps with pheromones. Jesus Avila said something well, mention this, but one of the problems is that sexual pheromones were very effective, but now that we've started using sexual confusion, it's kind of confused the whole thing, so to speak. We have detection and follow-up, and we have in Catalonia, we do this at the biofix, the first flight, and then find, based on this, determine the best time to intervene. Detection and following again. We usually count fruits, but of course that has a very high labor cost. Another traditional way that's been used in over 30 years is to work with certain pheromones, well, which aren't as reliable as they used to be. Using captures with sexual attractant traps, first generation, the second to third week, second to third generation, the first to second week. And they had also the threshold for fruit damage, 20 fruits by 50 trees. And of course, here it shows the time that you intervene. That doesn't include if you're using sexual attractants. Moment for intervention. If you go past the threshold and you're talking about the first generation, you have to act quickly to avoid treating the second and third generation. When you get past these thresholds, then you have to treat at 6 to 8 days. And if we're already seeing fruit damage, then we have to treat them immediately. There are many, many projects. There's, of course, the problem of resistance, but these are all authorized for this type of production. On the left, the ones for ecological production, organic production, and the other ones are for other production. Jesus Avilla mentioned this already. We have products in almost all the groups that are resistant. So we have to be very sure where these operate so we can try to make them as effective as possible to avoid generating resistance as much as possible. Well, in Girona, this year, we did a study on 1,792 hectares, which is quite a bit. It's the program called FRITET. The idea was to do an advanced IPM, working with confusion and insecticides. The result is 1.5. They do 1.5 treatments per year. So because there was resistance to avoid insecticide resistance, there was a combination of confusion and insecticides. Here, some of them, there were some that were treated more than 4 times, a little bit because there's a fear, since pheromone traps weren't being used, that we wanted to be sure that there would be no damage on the plot. Where you see the different generations. It was only the golden apples had 0.5% damage, and it's the 1% of plantations, or granny apples. You can see the results here as well. In the case of scab, I won't go into detail on this because Mark Trapman has given an excellent talk about how the evolution of this disease. We have the strategies that we can apply, and this was mentioned also by Mark Trapman, the intervention threshold. Well, in this case, it hasn't been set unless we use prediction models. And basically here the recommendation is to use these models. For over 30 years, we've been using the treatment of apple scab with F3 preventive treatment, and then depending on risk indications, doing further treatments. When there's a risk or an alert, or warning rather, we have some, for example, we have used a fungicide if it rains to keep the germination process, to stop the germination process. If the spore has germinated, if we don't stop it, of course, it will turn into an infection. So we're aware that this wouldn't work in very rainy areas, but under our conditions, we get some 36 hours to apply a product and we can stop the infection. And that's very important because by doing that, we can use contact fungicides to help avoid resistance, because we're almost never using systemic fungicides for apple scabs, and we only save that treatment for when we really need it to avoid generating resistance. Finally, if we don't have time to apply that, we do have other systemic type products which we can apply after 36 hours, more than 36 hours after the infection. Same as for codling moth, I've summed up here the situation for scab, apple scab, using these two programs. One, the RIM Pro program, which warns about primary infections. So if we don't have primary infections, we can actually avoid treating much earlier. There were 10 RIM Pro warnings this year and 29 MILS warnings. So you can see at the end of primary infections, some 20% of the plots didn't have scab. They weren't treatment. But if you look at the number of treatments done for the 10 infections, you have an average of about 13 treatments. So that in most of the cases, only 10, 11 treatments were done, and others, a few more had to be done during the summer when there's more damage. We're talking about almost 1,800 hectares, and only having 13 treatments, we feel was a good result, a good solution. With regard to products, we don't have problems. We have many of them, and they're very varied, and we're managing them pretty well, so they shouldn't give rise to problems. And I'm going now to the end, which is actually going back to the beginning. The Directive on Sustainable Use has an objective: prevention of risks for human and risks, health and the environment, and looking for technical and chemical alternatives. Well, what we've presented actually fully complies with this objective for sustainable treatments. And another thing that was mentioned earlier by Jose Fonseca was the communication in our progress, our breakthroughs to the consumer sector. Of 103 samples, these are all the active materials that appeared, but just notice that around 5 or 7%, there was 5 or 7% below the level of detection. So it's a reliable proof that the program is efficient. There's been no damage to the production, and even more importantly, we've been able to reduce the amount of post-harvest residues below the limit, reducing it to some 61% of orchards, residues between, and there's only 15% of the production where residues were somewhat higher, or we weren't able to lower them below 90%. However, this is a very, very small amount of the total. So this effort has really been able to support what Jose Fonseca was talking about, that is understanding quality as food security as well. I want to thank the companies in Girona, which have always thrown their full support behind our most innovative technologies, and a number of people who are the technicians who made all of this possible, particularly because of the technical decisions they have to take out in the field every day, and their follow-up and treatment of pests and other problems, and also for the organizers who have enabled us to be here and speak together. Thank you.
Bé, i finalment, doncs,
Finally, we have the last part of this session. This is a very innovative part having to do with business, the business sector. We've heard about the importance of decision-making today. Venancio Grau, I'm sure, will be talking about some of these decisions. He's the president of the Producers' Council of Girona. He has a degree in business sciences from the university in Girona, and he has a business administration degree, and he's in charge of Frutas Cerater, the group of fruit growers, as well as a member of Fruit Futur, Masmedia, and Afocat. The floor is yours, sir.
Gràcies, Josep Maria. Primer de tot, agrair...
Well, thank you, Josep Maria. I'd like to thank the organization that you have given me a space, given space for a producer, surrounded by scientists and technical people. But let me publicly thank all the speakers, not just for their contribution being extremely interesting, especially the first two, because in terms of experimentation, models, and cutting back residues and the integrated pest control, I'd like to thank the first two speakers. They have they've made a very, very important contribution. I'd also thank Luis Batllori publicly for all his work in this field. Sometimes an act of heroism because it's an uphill struggle. I shall talk to you as a producer. I'm a producer of apples in the Girona area, but I have I wear other hats, which is chair of the protected denominated area of the apple of Girona. We have to go from under our apple trees and see the wider world and come back and tell our producers how they should do things. I'd like to talk to you about integrated pest management as a whole, but also, as we've talked of two particular ones, how we've done things. Let's start with Carpocapsa, Cydia pomonella, until 2005. There was chemical control, but a lot of resistance appeared, and we couldn't move forward. And it was very worrying until then we had sort of sexual confusion. Carpocapsa is no longer a serious problem. It's a problem, but it's no longer devastating. We cannot, if you like, sleep on our laurels, but it's a circumstance, a feature which is there, but we've reached a stage where we can actually live with it. Now, when it comes to the Venturia apple scab, there were specific controls. Historically, we carry out systemic treatments, systematic controls to cover which were perhaps appropriate and not appropriate. And sometimes we overshot or undershot, and sometimes the pests got out of control. And then there was a series of warnings with mills, which gave us a lot of guidance, and we actually cut back the level of treatments, but we've heard the creator of Rimpro here, and that allowed us, with the prediction model Rimpro, we have less treatments, and that obviously leads to savings in costs and treatments and security we didn't have before. Now, if we follow the Rimpro model, there is possibility of some contamination, But if you do things properly, as it should, it really is, this risk is much reduced. Now I'm going to blow my own trumpet a bit. We're going to talk of all the systematic actions we've carried out concerning pests, and also which has been our methodology to apply these practices in the Girona apple denominated area, protected area. We had an organizational structure which has allowed us to carry out, to be effective. You have these three companies, Poma de Girona, Girona Fruits, Giro Poma, and Por la Costa Brava, which cover most of the 70 to 80 producers of the denominated area. There's a Mas Badia Foundation. José María Pagès is the director of this foundation, which is closely connected with the production technicians or specialists of these enterprises above. So sometimes from up top or sometimes down here, sometimes we haven't done things properly, we have found ways of improving management, either with FruitNet or with integrated production to get the certification necessary. FruitNet, IPM, Global Gap, whatever. So to urge that the plant defense associations and with the experts and observing local needs, we've asked for experimentation, for validation, and when the process has been validated, they've told us, and then they have carried a double-pronged action. Transmitting knowledge top down to the producers, and then a strategic option of these companies to implement these improvements. So we add up properly studied and validated techniques and the compulsive mandatory nature of implementation, because the producers have to do that. You have to do it. Technicians said, you can do it, it's efficient, and on top of that, you have to do it. So this has led the sum total to these aggregate improvements. Here's an example. If we set up the fruit.net application together with the companies, technicians, and the ones of the Maspadia Foundation, technical people, and the results have been excellent. You see, where we have implemented it. You've seen Fruit.net in Girona. You can see the blue line, and Fruit.net at a global level has been very, very successful in a short time. Everything gone up because there are no more hectares. Well, we're very proud of our achievement. It's a structure which functions, and I think it's useful to tell you about it, about what we've done, what we've achieved. Okay, now to conclude, and this is perhaps the key element of my presentation, is we looked at the challenges. Challenges is a word which we prefer over problems, over issues. The challenges of integrated pest management, of IPM. Here are a series of challenges which have arisen. I'll dwell upon them individually. And there are also a series of opportunities given to us by IPM. I won't number them now, but we'll look at them one by one. The first challenge, problem or challenge, is the appearance of new pests. As you know, with PPPs, to get a better quality of the fruit and a better sustainability, and so everything is more sustainable, we have moved from large spectrum produce to a smaller spectrum produce. And I mentioned the Gauss curve. Certain things fall out of the safety net. It's a reality. You have to live with that. You must be aware of it. Then another problem is that in some way, as before, we didn't quite know how pests work. And the opening presentation gives examples of how to know, how to think, and I like that idea, knowing the dynamic, some things we're already doing, the internal dynamic of the pest, what are their natural predators, to know how it works, the ins and outs of it, how to attack it while respecting the environment to ensure natural control of the pest. Well, here what we do, we have to be very specific, not generalized treatments. We have to look at the problems when they start. At the initial moment, it's easier. And in each pest, that'll be different. And we have to be a lot more careful with time and space. We're more disciplined, if you like. It's one way of managing these problems. This is no secret. Another problem, the disappearance of active material. Well, which were very useful at the beginning to attack certain pests. Now they're more specific. And we have an issue because sometimes we leave certain areas unprotected. And the appearance of these new products we don't use because of residues or environmental areas, but of economic reasons. There are pathologies or specific problems of a geographical area which need products which are not necessarily negative for the environment, and because there was a lack of sale, their registration has not been maintained, and these products have vanished from the market. So when products vanish from the market, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad or noxious products from the point of view of sustainability or residue. Often it's for economic reasons. There's a big debate about that here. We have to find solutions, because sometimes some products which are good, which are effective, and for certain geographical areas work well, and they've abandoned the market, not necessarily because they're noxious, well, because for economic reasons. And the chemical industry will withdraw certain products from the market, but they might have to produce new ones, new efficient products that are within the present scope of the law. They have a high registration cost, and they are expensive. And at the end of the day, the producer at the end of the day is the one who has to carry the can. And they're not necessarily more effective, but because as they lie within the present scope of the law and the norms, and they have no competition, because, as I said, the previous ones have been withdrawn from the market, the prices are a lot steeper. There's another challenge, a final challenge, administrative requirements. Before, and I'm not very young, but before, fruit growers 40 years ago were used to carry out treatments when a technician came along, or even a salesman said, okay, use that. And they forgot about all the administrative requirements. Society moves forward, as is the case, and we do need to have protocols, to have a more regulated environment, in particular when it comes to foodstuffs. We have to be very, very careful, but that was not always the case. There are key examples, the Hesperides program, many of you will know that, which is an IT program which facilitates this task. I think that was the last challenge. Or is it? No, this is the last challenge. The constant appearance of more red tape certifications, rules, and we had Fruit.net certifications. I won't mention all of them because I have no time. And this is a challenge which is difficult to take on board, because the administration have their rules and requirements, clients as well, and so on and so on. This does have a cost for, say, the producer. For a small producer, is pretty difficult to deal with. Now, but let's look at opportunity, because that's what I wanted to center upon. It's always nicer to talk about opportunities and challenges. Before, we had to carry out sort of forced cultivation areas. If one area had good climate but had a propensity to fungi, well, we could apply many fungicidal treatments. That's not the case. This is good and bad. That means that each area produces what is optimal for that area. an example, Girona is a great area for peaches, and the climate was not the best, so we've moved away from that and gone to apples, which is what works. Sustainability and social responsibility. We could talk about here for about an hour, but we only have 2 minutes. The society, member society, in the largest sense of the word, is one that pays for us for our product, does have certain requirements. A, respect the environment, because it belongs to everyone, logical. B, we should offer a product which is at the reach of everyone, which is healthy, and which consumers like. This is what is required of us, and we have to go down that route. So if we are, if you like, know how to listen to these requirements and know how to produce what the consumer wants and do so quickly, that can provide us a lot of value added, and integrated management is a big help there. Another point, products do vanish, and there is a demand for fruit or vegetables which is more kind of natural. And this does force us to be imaginative, to move away from chemical combat, and to have apples, we treatment are carried out mechanically rather than chemically. It doesn't have a direct negative bearing on apples in terms of residues. So this kind of need can make us be inventive, new ways of working, which we hadn't envisaged traditionally. Another opportunity when it comes to IPM, we are seeking to find this a natural kind of balance or equilibrium which our great-grandparents' orchards had, where there's no excess or shortcoming. We don't have to prune too much. We want to avoid, if you like, excess risk of pests. We go back to a natural equilibrium, a natural balance of the plant. We go back to a more natural ecosystem, and this will imply greater regularity in terms of size, in terms of production, cutting back the risk of pests, and to have a healthier plant, basically. I think this has already been discussed. Advantages for the consumer. We're constantly talking of food safety and food security. That's fine. That has to be a given. But we need to have a production which provides value to the consumer. Not just healthy ones, but in terms of emotion, improvement of health, taste, and it would be impossible if we didn't have IPM. From here, we can talk of these virtues, this virtuous circle, which provides something else, that added little extra of emotion and attractiveness. Now, strategic differentiation. This could be controversial. We are in work concerning MRLs. Some administrations talk of, and then the goalposts are going to be changing. No, this not 2% here or 3% there. This changes. This is a problem. Is the battle of the MRLs? This can, if you like, put in jeopardy our production. But we have a limitation there, maximum residue level, and if we are cunning enough and proactive enough to move ahead of the pack, it can give us our competitive advantages vis-à-vis competitors, in all fields. So the MRL, which producers often do not like, because thus changes our way of working, but let's turn it around and see it as a golden opportunity we have. So every cloud has a silver lining, if you like, and to beat the competitor. And now, to conclude, my conclusions would be: it is true that IPM does involve changes. It brings us challenges, issues. It can it can provide big risks, but a lot of opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, the world of the fruit is not can provide better value, more health than other sectors of the food market. What with that? So that this girl, when she becomes a mother, can feed her children healthily and will preach by example. Thank you very much.
Bé, hem acabat ara.
Well, we've finished the section on speakers with the 3 visions this morning that we've seen. I think it's been hugely enriching. But to not lose momentum and the thread of what we've talked about today, we will have questions first on what the speakers have talked about, our 4 speakers this morning. We'll start with questions relating to what they spoke on. I apologize. I can't see any, well, I can't really see almost anything, but I'm sure there are a lot of hands raised. I just can't see them. And I assume there's a microphone, a roving mic for the, if somebody does wish to ask a question, do so from the floor.
I, sisplau, pregunteu a qui va dirigida la pregunta.
And please say whom your question is for.
Podeu obrir el llum de la sala? Podeu obrir el llum de la sala?
della pioma dell'oliveto, la pianta esercita nel
We do need microphones, please. We use the speakers from the floor to use a roving microphone.
Sorry. Okay, I'm Edison Pasqualini. I come from Italy, from Emilia Romagna. I have a question from Luis, or probably also for Jesus. We use pheromone against Cydia pomonella, also in Italy too, but we have to use a lot of insecticide also. For example, we use a fork from 8 to 12 insecticide every year. So I want to know if here is the same or not. If you use only pheromone, or if you, how many insecticide you are using?
Lluís? En el nostre cas...
In our case, where we use sexual confusion, normally there's no problem of damage to people. We use a larvicide for the first generation, which is specific for codling moth. It's also true there are many orchards where they may have to use a product against woolly moth, moth rather. And so the question is the selectivity for codling moth. Between then and harvest, there may be 2 or 3 treatments with insecticides, one for codling moth specifically, and then one for woolly aphid, and another one for maybe emerging pest, another one. The controls that are done at the end of the first generation. I didn't mention this actually for this system of zero damage. If we see there's zero damage in the case of codling moth, we don't need to have any more interventions.
No hay nada diferente que añadir en el caso de Lleida.
Well, in the case of Lleida, where I'm from, the situation is virtually the same. We do 8 or 10 insecticide treatments against codling moth with sexual confusion. That's much higher than the what we would normally do in Lleida. Other questions?
Yo quería preguntar a...
My question was for Luis and Jesus to know the best strategy or the best moments and the most appropriate treatment for the aphid in pest control. For the woolly apple aphid, if you want to avoid using other insecticides over the summer, sometimes if we control our orchards, it's enough, and we haven't had to do other specific treatments. Occasionally, if they colonize the branches and we do one treatment, that's usually enough to control the woolly apple aphid. And we use a biological control as well.
Alguna altra pregunta queda a la sala?
Another question?
Aquí en tenim una. Tercera fila o quarta.
There's somebody in the third or fourth row there.
I'm Emilio Montesinos from the University of... This is a question for Mark Trapman. You obviously expect my question. Is about in the case of scab control, and when we are producing under organic regulation.
Yes.
In the case of a very susceptible cultivar, for example, how many treatments are often or as a standard schedule applied with these products authorized for organic production and using the RIMPRO model? It's just as an example.
Organic fruit growers spray a lot. I'm from the Netherlands, so we don't have these 10 insecticides, but we have a lot more fungicide than you usually apply, I think. I hear myself double. It's not good. I would say in organic orchards in northwestern Europe, you talk about between 20 and 30 sprays against apple scab and other diseases. Yeah. I think that this has not so much to do with the model, but more with the climate. And when you talk about organic, you often speak about products that have a very limited time that they work. So if we use bicarbonate, potassium bicarbonate, you can use to control apple scab.
Un momento, Marc.
Just a moment.
És el 1, 2, 3. Ja, ara?
Yep. Did you miss something? Okay, when we use bicarbonate to control apple scab in organic, that works, but bicarbonate is very solvable in water. So you have to time it very well just after infections, and then it works, but it washes away. So if you have another infection in 2 days later, you have to treat again. So in organic, we use products that are very soft, you could call them. Again, I'm lost.
Marc, perdona un momento, que te lo cambian.
No?
Not working.
Yes, this is working. Okay. So in organic, we use soft chemicals, but they live very shortly on the tree. So that's why we have to treat a lot. So if it rains for a week, we may have to treat 3 times to cover up with all these infections. Is that more or less an answer on your question? Yeah.
A la meitat de la sala, costat esquerre.
About halfway down the room.
Vila Geliu de Masbadia. Volia preguntar...
Masbadia, I want to ask Mark Trapman if the inoculum techniques are frequently used in your area, so they're used in your area or an area you're familiar with. Is it better to use the ground as opposed to another kind of treatment? See, apparently he hasn't understood. I'm sorry, sir. The reduction of inoculum for the treatment of scab, apple scab. are these techniques applied as a general rule? And do you think it's better to do a kind of a crumbling or a crushed treatment as opposed to just scattering around? Is there some? How do you reduce the inoculum from one year to the next in some? That's the basic, the crux of the question.
Okay, to reduce the inoculum, there are several possibilities, from chemical to mechanical. First, we know that if you apply urea just before leaf fall, when the leaves already decided to drop, so just before leaf fall, you apply urea in about 50 kilo per hectare. It, first of all, makes degradation of the leaves quicker, so they vanish from the orchard quicker than if you did not. And the other effect of urea is that it blocks the formation of pseudothecia and spores for next year. So the first step would be to apply urea in autumn just before leaf fall. The next thing is to find some mechanical way to make your leaves in small pieces. Any leaf crusher could do that so that the leaves are degraded quicker in your orchards. And you have to leave it to the fruit growers to find a machine that does it well. So the machine I showed is an experimental machine that is used on Boulder's area, but normally my growers do it by a flail mower. So this machine with these metal parts in it that crushes leaves. Anything that you can think of that makes the leaf go away quicker during winter will work. Is that enough answer, or?
¿Y los tratamientos de urea, Mar?
And your urea treatments?
Urea treatments are made in autumn or in spring, but mostly in autumn. What's the question about urea treatments?
En cuanto a la reducción de inoculo.
For reduction of inoculum.
Urea treatments have at least 70% effectiveness. There are many trials done all over the world since 50 years with urea and equal material that reduce the inoculum for next year. So that works. My experience is that if you do trials in this, it should be big trials. If you do half a hectare urea or mechanical leaf removal and other half a hectare, you don't do it, you don't see differences because it's too close to each other. You have to do larger field trials to see the effects. A problem in advisory is that if you have a year with a lot of scab problems, growers listen and they do it in autumn. But if the next year is good and they have no problem with apple scab, they forget again and they don't do it again. But it should be a fixed point in your IPM strategy.
¿Alguna otra pregunta a la sala?
Sí.
More questions? Pedro Gordillo from Masvadia for Mark Trapman. We have the experience that we've had years with serious scab infections, and those years are followed by years with very little scab infection. Could you tell us something about perhaps the winter conditions that determine whether the infection will be heavy or not? Thank you.
Okay, I can tell you something. But the first thing I have to tell is there's a lot not known about that. We understand very little about what happens with apple scab from autumn to spring. Main thing is very favorable is when we have wet, mild winters. So when it's wet, per leaf, per infected leaf, much more pseudothecia are formed and produce ascospores in spring than when you have a very dry winter. And it seems that especially the first part of winter is important. When the leaves fall on the soil, they need temperature and wetness to initiate this maturation, and this is pseudothecia formation. So if you have a wet autumn, you can expect more spores the next year than if you have a very dry autumn. But also the last part of winter is important. Again, if it's more wet during the last part of winter, you have a higher productivity of the pseudothecia. but it's not something that you can really count or simulate. We know too little about that.
Alguna altra mà?
Any other hands raised?
Comentaris d'altres tipus.
Well, I don't know if now that the debate is open, anybody has any other questions on integrated pest management for apples. Venanzi brought up something that I'm particularly interested in, which is looking really, really appreciating the products we're already using, and see how we'll be able to keep using them. I mean, we have to use them to the maximum advantage if we want them to keep working. I don't know if can you hear me? Wow, that's a big debate going on in Girona between technicians and producers and so forth. And it's a very important debate. It's important to have healthy fruit. That's the goal. But you have to look at who has the power to buy fruit. Whether, for example, usually it's a supermarket in the case of apple. And they're the ones who decide what the consumers will finally eat. The only way to change this is to have a brand together with certain attributes, and the consumers understand that, so they decide what they're going to eat. In the case of apples, I think Pink Lady has done this. I don't know if there are any others that have, but they did a lot of marketing, a lot of advertising on that. What consumers want isn't so much a healthy piece of fruit, that they assume that it's going to be like that, but they want a piece of fruit with values that they associate with a brand. And this has to be communicated to consumers, but this is expensive. Just imagine what Danone spends on their advertising. It's millions of euros. So that's a solution. There is an Italian brand with brand in Spain. It briefly went over what the value of that product was, so a consumer could pick it out. We're talking about consumers who don't have much knowledge about this, but then we have supermarkets or distributors who don't have scientific criteria for their selection. Well, when it gets to the consumer, well, it may be a healthy apple, but what's important here is that if you're saying this is a healthy apple, you're saying the other ones aren't healthy. And now I'm speaking as a consumer. I'm not getting what I want, which is maybe that the apple is perfect for my age, for the sport I practice, or because I'm in poor health. If we can inform consumers about these values, which is, associated with a brand, this is not viable economically speaking, but if we can do this through advertising, it's really effective. And we're doing it a bit in Girona. We're trying to inform the intermediaries, supermarkets and markets and so forth, of the attributes of these fruits. How do we do that? Well, that doesn't require a lot of money, but it really means that the people who are in charge of selling the fruit sell the fruit, and talk about it. They describe the fruit, and they provide a fruit that whose flavor is pretty much always the same, that they can rely on, and that's what we're doing in Girona. Now, Girona is a town. We're not a huge multinational, but what we do is we target our communication to the those who are actually going to be getting other people to buy the fruit, which is supermarkets and so forth, and distributors. Now, distributors need to have health security considerations covered, but consumers will respond for more emotional reasons because they associate something with the fruit they're buying. So technicians are putting in a lot of effort, and they're working very hard. And sometimes you might think it's you're not seeing any results of that by reducing the amount of chemical products used. But it is actually changing things because we can differentiate two types of production now. And because the distributors now have their spokesperson, maybe it's not coming out as a particular brand, we agree, but it would be very, it's not worth spending a lot of money to brand something that doesn't have a lot of consumption. We have time for one last question. I have a question for Dr. Jesus Avila. In the presentation, you said, Dr., how some of the application of some of these chemical products confuse the males on the with the pheromone attractant. It's used as an oviside, but we wonder what the effect would be. There's not of information in general of the sublethal effect of insecticides on the behavior of lepidopters. In the case of codling moth and methoxyphenicide, we're seeing that males that have been exposed to residues of methoxyphenicide at sublethal levels, they have more trouble in detecting the pheromone plume, meaning that they don't as easily find the females, but it also means that they can't as easily find the plumes of the sexual confusion systems. And what I want to say here is that regardless of, let us say, well, it will be different depending whether the confusion is done by competition or not through competition. If it's not functioning via competition, if the male can't follow the plume of either the female or the dispenser, well, it's the same, so we don't care, right? The result is the same. If it's not through competition, it's not the same because we want males to follow the plumes of the false females, that is the dispensers. To what extent, in the laboratory example, I showed an example on the slide, or in a wind tunnel, could you resolve this as a failure of control in sexual confusion? In fact, there's a doctoral dissertation that's being done on this to determine what the situation is, because it's very little information, but certainly we feel it's an area worth exploring further to know what the actual effect is. Thank you. We are concluding our debate on the Apple session. To quickly sum this up, the organization has brought together, I think, science, technology, and business, and I think this has been a great idea. That's been the model they've applied to this, these sessions. We've heard about codling moth, which is a key and strategic pest in apples. Large scale control than just by plots. Has to be done with the help of advisors and technical services on the territory. It's important to work, to consider working at a different level. Currently at the medium and large scale, it's being fairly effective in terms of population estimates. We have to consider new ways of doing it. In terms of the scab, apple scab, I liked what Mark Trapman said, talking about precision control, and I think that's really the key in correctly controlling apple scab. we've heard that that's the main apple disease and or pest, and that's we have to try to reduce the amount of residue that it produces. And finally, we've heard about decision-making aids, and we hope in the immediate future there will be more and more powerful data for these systems to make them more useful and even better. And finally, this final reflection of valuing what we do have, maybe to have things really work, we need to attribute to them the value they really have. So that's it. We want to thank the speakers in this session. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough time to have a longer dialogue, but I'm sure in the third session that will be possible. And thank you very much, those of you who are here this morning.
And thank you for the translations.
if you're willing to